It is 2:20 in the morning on July 23, 1982. A helicopter hovers 25 feet above a fake Vietnamese village built in a place called Indian Dunes, just north of Los Angeles. Down below, an actor named Vic Morrow is wading through a shallow river. He is carrying 2 children, one in each arm. The cameras are rolling. Mortar charges are exploding around them. A pyrotechnician is about to push a button that will end 3 lives. Minutes earlier, Morrow had pulled aside a production assistant and said, almost laughing, "I've got to be crazy to do this shot. I should have asked for a stunt double. What can they do but kill me, right?" Those are the last words anyone remembers him saying. The film he was making is called Twilight Zone the movie. It is being executive produced by Steven Spielberg. The studio is Warner Brothers. The director of this particular segment is John Landis, the man who made Animal House and The Blues Brothers. This is supposed to be the prestige horror anthology of 1983, a reunion of new Hollywood directors, a love letter to Rod Serling. Instead, in about 90 seconds, it will become the worst on-set disaster in American film history. And here's what almost no one outside Hollywood remembers. They finished the movie. They reworked the ending. They released it. It made $42 million at the box office. This is the story of how that happened, and of the man whose name almost nobody on that set wanted to say out loud afterward. Vic Morrow was born Victor Morozov on Valentine's Day, 1929 in the Bronx. His parents were Russian Jewish immigrants. The family moved to Asbury Park, New Jersey when he was small. He dropped out of high school, joined the Navy at 17, came back, drifted through Mexico, and somehow ended up at the Actors Workshop in Greenwich Village. In 1955, at age 26, he got his first film role. Blackboard Jungle. He played Artie West, a switchblade-carrying delinquent who terrorizes Glenn Ford's idealistic teacher. The performance got him a contract with MGM. It also typecast him for life. "Many of the roles offered to me," he later said, "were switchblade parts. To be typed isn't good for an actor like me." He left MGM after a single year. For the next decade, he survived in television, westerns, crime shows, walk-on villains. He directed when he could. Then in 1962, ABC cast him as Sergeant Chip Saunders in Combat, a World War II drama that ran for 5 seasons. For the first time in his career, Morrow was a leading man, a hero. He even directed 6 episodes himself, including a celebrated 2-part anti-war story called Hills Are for Heroes. When Combat ended in 1967, the lead man years ended with it. He went back to working. He took whatever came. Made-for-TV movies, Italian B pictures, a creature feature called Humanoids from the Deep. He had 2 daughters with the actress Barbara Turner. The older one was named Jennifer Lee Morrow. She would later change her name to Jennifer Jason Leigh. By 1982, Vic Morrow was 53 years old. He had been in front of cameras for nearly 30 years. He was not a star. He was a working actor. And when John Landis offered him a substantial role in a Steven Spielberg-produced film, with a real budget and a real release, he took it. He told friends it was the best part he had been offered in years. Twilight Zone, the movie, was conceived as an anthology. 4 directors, 4 segments, 3 of them remakes of beloved Rod Serling episodes. The 4th, the opener, would be an original story by John Landis. Spielberg directed a sentimental piece called Kick the Can. Joe Dante directed It's a Good Life. George Miller directed Nightmare at 20,000 Feet with John Lithgow. The whole thing was conceived as a celebration. Friends working together, big names doing television-scale stories with movie-scale budgets. Landis's original segment was called Time Out. Vic Morrow plays a man named Bill Connor, a bigot, the kind of barstool racist who has just been passed over for a promotion at work and is taking it out on every minority he can think of. He storms out of the bar and finds himself transported through time, first to Nazi-occupied France, where the SS hunts him as a Jew, then to the Jim Crow South, where the Klan tries to lynch him, then to Vietnam, where American soldiers mistake him for Viet Cong. In the original ending, Bill Connor was supposed to find redemption. He was going to rescue 2 Vietnamese orphans from a destroyed village while the air cavalry attacked overhead. He carries the children to safety across a river. The act of saving them returns him to the present. He has learned compassion through suffering. That was the script. That was the scene Vic Morrow was shooting at 2:20 in the morning on July 23, 1982. He never finished it. The two child actors playing the Vietnamese orphans were Myca Dinh, age 7, and Renee Shin-Yi Chen, age 6. Neither of them should have been on that set. California child labor law in 1982 was unambiguous. A 6-year-old could not work past 6:30 in the evening. Children working in film required studio permits, on-set teachers, social workers, and sign-offs from the labor commissioner. Pyrotechnics in proximity to a minor required additional fire safety review. The production had none of those things for Myca and Renee. According to court testimony, the associate producer George Folsey Jr. arranged the hire personally. He paid Renee's uncle, Peter Wei-Tae Chen, in cash. There were no contracts. The children were brought to set in the middle of the night. According to one production secretary, John Landis told the crew, half joking, "We're all going to jail." The fire safety officer that night was a man named Jack Tice. He was responsible for signing off on the pyrotechnics. He was never told the children were on set. Folsey allegedly instructed the parents not to mention them to anyone in uniform. Myca's father later testified that he had been told the explosions would be small, that his son would be carried by a big movie star, and that nothing could go wrong. His son was decapitated by a helicopter rotor that night. The pilot of the Bell UH-1B Iroquois helicopter was named Dorsey Wingo. He was a Vietnam veteran. He had flown gunships in real combat. He was hired specifically because he could put a low-altitude military helicopter through aggressive maneuvers. Wingo had concerns from day one. He had flown an earlier shot the night before in which mortar charges had detonated closer to his airframe than agreed. The helicopter shook. He landed angry. Other crew warned him not to complain to Landis. Landis had a reputation. Speak up too loudly and you would be replaced. The pyrotechnician on set was named Paul Stewart. His assistant, James Camomile, was the man with his hand on the mortar firing board. Stewart had told Camomile something specific before the fatal scene. Do not detonate the charges if the helicopter is anywhere near them. There is also a stunt performer who, according to court testimony, had told Landis that the explosions seemed too large. Landis allegedly answered, "If you think that was big, you haven't seen anything yet." These were not edge case worries. These were professionals telling each other on the record that this was not safe. The shoot went forward. The scene called for the helicopter to hover at 25 feet directly above the village set while Vic Morrow waded through the river carrying the two children. As the helicopter pulled away, mortar charges hidden inside the huts would explode, simulating the village being destroyed by airstrike. The mortar effects had to fire after the helicopter was clear. That night, James Camomile fired the charges early. The metal lid of one mortar shot upward. It struck the helicopter's tail rotor. The rotor disintegrated. Within seconds, the helicopter was uncontrollable. It pitched, dropped, and came down on top of Vic Morrow and the two children. The main rotor, still spinning, struck Vic Morrow and Myca Dinh. Both were decapitated. Renee Shin-Yi Chen was crushed beneath the landing skid. The footage exists. Multiple cameras were rolling for the wide shot. Several crew members later said they thought in the first second that it was a planned effect. Then they understood. The set went silent. Then it did not. By sunrise, the story was on every wire service in America. Spielberg arrived at the lot. According to a biographer, he confronted Landis. He never spoke to him as a friend again. He later told the writer Joseph McBride, "No movie is worth dying for. I think people are standing up much more now than ever before to producers and directors who ask too much." The production shut down for weeks. Lawyers moved in. The children's parents filed civil suits. So did Vic Morrow's daughters. Jennifer Jason Leigh, 20 years old, already an actress, filed a wrongful death action against John Landis personally. The Morrow family eventually settled for $850,000. The children's families collected millions. But here is the part most people forget. The film did not stop. Warner Brothers had $10 million sunk into Twilight Zone the movie. 3 of 4 segments were already complete. Spielberg's was done. Dante's was done. Miller's was done. Only Landis's segment had been damaged. And only the climax, the river scene, was missing. The studio could have shelved the film, could have written off the loss, could have at least cut the Landis segment entirely. They did not. Landis was given the chance to recut his segment around what had already been shot. The original redemption ending, the rescue of the Vietnamese children, was scrapped. There would be no children in the final cut. Instead, the film would now end with Bill Connor trapped on a Holocaust train, a cattle car bound for the camps, watching his old friends laugh outside a bar he can no longer reach. He sees them through the slats. He calls out. They cannot hear him. It is, in a strange and unintended way, a more honest ending. There is no redemption. There is only consequence. Twilight Zone, the movie, opened on June 24, 1983, 11 months after the deaths. It made $6.5 million its opening weekend. It finished its run at $42 million worldwide. Reviews were mixed. Roger Ebert called the Landis segment the weakest of the four. Audiences mostly did not know what they were watching. The film is on streaming services right now. You can rent it tonight. The criminal case opened on July 23, 1986, exactly 4 years to the day after the deaths. 5 defendants stood trial. John Landis, George Folsey Jr., production manager Dan Allingham, special effects coordinator Paul Stewart, and pilot Dorsey Wingo. It was the first time in American history a director had been criminally charged for a death on his own set. The prosecutor was Leigh Perwin Dago-Stee-No, a deputy district attorney known for her aggressive style. The defense lead was James Neal, the same James Neal who had prosecuted Watergate. The trial ran for 10 months. 69 days of testimony, 71 witnesses. Dago-Stee-No's case was straightforward. The director knew children were illegally on set. The director knew the pyrotechnics were dangerous. The director ignored repeated warnings. People died. That, she argued, was involuntary manslaughter. Landis's defense was equally simple. The accident was unforeseeable. No one could have predicted that Chamomile would fire the charges early. Landis testified for days. He admitted the children had been hired in violation of labor law. He denied being warned of any specific danger. Dago-Stee-No called his testimony one huge blatant lie. Closing arguments ended on May 19, 1987. The jury deliberated for 9 days. On May 29, 1987, they returned not guilty verdicts on every count for every defendant. No one went to prison. If the Twilight Zone case is now mostly forgotten, the changes it forced on Hollywood are not. They are everywhere. They are why a modern film set looks the way it does. Before 1982, on-set safety was largely informal. A stunt coordinator would say, "This looks dangerous," and a producer would say, "We're behind schedule." And that was the end of it. There was no independent authority on a film set, no one whose job was specifically to refuse. After 1982, the Directors Guild of America established a safety hotline that crew members could call anonymously. The Screen Actors Guild followed with its own 24-hour line. Warner Brothers compiled what became known as the Industry Safety Bulletins, documents covering pyrotechnics, firearms, helicopters, animals, waterwork. Studios standardized them. Insurance carriers began requiring them. A new profession was born, the on-set risk consultant, independent, hired by the insurer, not the studio, empowered to halt production, cannot be fired by the director. Between 1982 and 1986, the rate of filming-related accidents in the United States fell by 69.6%. In 1987, California established the Motion Picture and Entertainment Safety Program, the first state-level regulator dedicated to film sets. Modern Hollywood, every safety meeting, every pyro briefing, every signed waiver, every pause for the armorer to confirm a cold gun exists because 3 people died at Indian Dunes on July 23, 1982. John Landis directed Coming to America the next year. It made $300 million. He kept working. He still works. In a 1996 interview, he said, "It was an enormous tragedy that I have not stopped thinking about for a single day." Steven Spielberg never directed with him again. Jennifer Jason Leigh became one of the most respected actors of her generation. She has rarely spoken publicly about her father's death. Vic Morrow is buried at Hillside Memorial Park in Culver City. His grave is a few hundred feet from the studios where he spent his life trying to escape Artie West. The 2 child actors who died with him are buried in Rose Hills, in Whittier. Their families never spoke to the press in any depth. There is almost no public record of who they were. And the film is still out there. Twilight Zone, the movie, 1983, available for streaming. The segment Landis directed runs about 33 minutes. There is no acknowledgement of what happened during its making. There is no dedication. The credits run as if it were any other film. A man named Vic Morrow stood in a river at 2 o'clock in the morning, holding 2 children he barely knew, and was killed by a helicopter for $42 million. They finished the film anyway.